My mother was a member of the Black Panther Party in the 1970s. And towards the end of her life, I asked her, I said, Mom, what's up with the movement? She said, oh, yeah, we won. My question to you is, do you think we won? And did we fight for the right things?
To Glenn's comment that he's exhilarated that the taboo on anti-Semitism is starting to dissolve, because that's what it is. Keep in mind that this time around, the Jews have guns.
I teach at a state university in California, and the feeling that I have is that we are all polishing the brass in the Titanic. You know, higher education is just taking a nosedive. They literally see the whole thing disappearing.
I had a tenant named Lily White who would write me her check, and it made me laugh and laugh and laugh. Is this reparations?
Somehow Epstein may be linked to Mossad because he's Jewish. He's Mossad and everybody knows it, but we can't talk about it because the Jews control everything. Well, if we control everything, how do we wind up in the ovens if we control everything? And we're not winding up in the ovens this time.
Do you have a question you want to ask?
Yeah, what's your question?
When it comes to self-censorship, where do you draw the line between keeping a relationship with a family member and speaking your mind?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, isn't it?
You guys seem to be on a roll with this Epstein stuff. I don't want to step on that.
I think you can go ahead.
We can,
Okay.
yeah.
Glenn, I just have a question because and forgive my naivete for this because I'm only 19, but I've been listening to you for a number of years. And I used to be a big Thomas Sowell guy. Then I started reading you. Then I read Michelle Alexander. Then I've basically read everybody on the question. And I've thought to myself, with the current turn that you've made, with your proximity to people like Tucker Carlson nowadays, you're a little more friendly with conservatives now. Is there any reservation that you still have? Because I think in my mind, this is still the guy that wrote favorably of Khalil Gibran Muhammad's condemnation of blackness. This is still the guy that wrote a blurb for the new Jim Crow. You know, is there any kind of tension there that you feel? Because I mean, I think it's complicated because I understand both sides of the argument a lot better now in a way that I would have hand waved back in my more conservative days.
Yeah, Achilles. Thank you. And the answer to your question is yes. And you mentioned Khalil. I know him well. I have a very warm spot in my heart for Khalil Gibran Muhammad, who had been a student of David Levering Lewis and was a professor before he came to Harvard, and I guess he's at Princeton now. And his book, The Condemnation of Blackness, which I read with such excitement, his history of the dealing in terms of criminal justice and social order maintenance with the migrant Black American populations coming out of the South in the late decades of the 19th and the early decades of the 20th century, and comparing and contrasting that with how it is that similar behavioral and order maintenance issues were being dealt with amongst the European immigrant populations. The condemnation of blackness, the idea of stigma, racial stigma, which figures prominently in my arguments in The Anatomy of Racial Inequality as an additional dimension of marginalization and exclusion for African Americans, having to do with the social meanings of race, the connotations that attend to in the public imagination to race. I admire Khalil. I continue to admire him. So yeah, what happened? And you mentioned Thomas Sowell. As it happens, I'm very much immersing myself in the works of Thomas Sowell these days because I'm responsible to help to organize a conference celebrating his life and his work at Stanford later this year. So I've been reading his books and been thinking long and hard about what his career represents and where his ideas, his Hayekian kind of libertarian tinged free market liberty-centered vision, fits in. So I've been thinking a lot about all of these things that Khalil asked. Did you want to follow up?
Sure. Let me think. I just feel that, I mean, I know the question keeps coming up, like, is race over? Is race over? That whole thing. And I don't know. It seems like the more I listen to old Glenn, I think it can't be over. It's something that's just, it pervades every aspect of human life. That's not to say that we turn away from objectivity. North is still north, as Clarence Thomas would say. But I don't know. I just don't think it would be naive to act as if we can live in Coleman Hughes's ideal universe, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that. I very much agree with that. This is a question I have been asking myself with a great deal of anxiety. Is race over? There's a sense in which I don't think you can escape the conclusion that race is over. A moment is over. I in the same way that I think you can overplay your hand in defense of the outrages of Israel's prosecution of the war in Gaza. You can be so defensive of that with your arguments about human shields and so forth that you begin to lose credibility. I think you can overplay your hand in terms of anti-racism and in terms of the centering of race as a basis for making public policy. I think the Supreme Court's 2023 rebuke to affirmative action, I think the anti-DEI mania, I think the ease with which anti-Semitism has become, to wit, Colombia's recent agreement, the order of the day. There are going to be cash payments paid out to Jewish members of the Colombia community for the affronts that were imposed upon them during the height of the anti-Gaza war demonstrations on that campus. And I don't say that they don't have them coming. I have not parsed the case in its entirety, but I know that that's very, very significant, and it's a kind of turning of the wheel. But you say something in that makes me smile. You say if Glenn Loury wrote as he did, race can't be over. My God, that is a challenge to me to figure out. I was talking about this with Cornell West in a recent episode of the Glenn Show, to figure out what the contemporary expression of the eternal fault line in American identity and consciousness that has to do with the inheritance of the legacy of slavery and whatnot. So I don't want it to be over either. Not to mention the autobiographical dimension of it. Who am I and what has my life added up to? And what role does race play in that? And have I been, as I said to Cornell, have I been barking up a tree, chasing a false god, investing in something ephemeral that is a figment of my imagination? I agree about Coleman. I had Coleman up to talk to one of my classes last semester about his book, The End of Race Politics. And I thought at the end of it, and I admire and respect Coleman as a young journalist of talent and reach. But I said, man, you say the end of race politics, but you really mean the end of race, don't you? To which he had no satisfactory response in my estimation. He wouldn't take I mean to say he wouldn't take responsibility for, in effect, arguing for the end of race. But those are just some thoughts.
Robert, you had your hand raised for a while. Why don't you unmute yourself?
I have 2 or 3 questions. The first question regards angrynomics, the concept that Mark Blythe has, the Scottish professor Mark Blythe. And I was wondering, and I've been feeling this, what was the purpose of the tariff war? And it seems to me, based on Mitt Romney's 2011 secret speech recording where he said half the people don't pay any taxes, that maybe they figured out a way to get everyone to pay some taxes. So I was wondering your thoughts on that as an economist. And then I have two more short questions.
Let me respond to that. I know Mark Blythe. He's my colleague here at Brown University. He's a very clever and interesting and funny guy. I respect him. Angrynomics, I hadn't heard that. Tariffs is an indirect way of getting people to pay taxes. It's not crazy. In my mind, it is an indirect tax on goods and services and factors of production. And, you know, some of it will be paid through the supply side, and some of it will be paid by the customers. And, you know, they are paying taxes to the government. How much? Compared to the corporate and personal income tax, I don't know. I actually really don't know. But I don't think it's a crazy idea that you should look at the tariff regime as a kind of tax regime.
Thank you. I'm biracial. I was born in 1969. I was raised in the African American community entirely, and my mother was a member of the Black Panther Party in the 1970s. And towards the end of her life, in the late 2000s, she had got the house that she had always wanted, which was a log cabin in the middle of the woods. And I asked her, I said, Mom, you know, what's up with the movement? And where are we with the movement? And this was in 2009, so I guess Obama had been elected. She said, oh, yeah, we won. And I said, well, what does that mean? She says, you have to start acting like victors now. And we fought for you, and now it's your turn to enjoy the benefits of that victory and stop worrying about anything but we won. So then my question to you is do you think we won? And did we fight for the right things? Because I also adhere to the Claude Anderson theories of Black business and everybody working together, but that's not what we fought for. We fought to integrate. And that was our, you know, what were our victory terms? If you're fighting a revolution, you should know what victory is. And so, well, under those terms, I don't get knocked off the sidewalks when I walk through a southern city. No one spits on me, calls me names. I can get a mortgage, a credit card, all the other stuff. So is it up to us to now act like victors? What are your thoughts?
You know, I was talking with Randall Kennedy, the law professor at Harvard, African American, written a lot about race, crime, and the law, and he has a book called Nigger, The History of a Forbidden Word. I subtitled it that effect, but Nigger is the title of the book. And he takes on a lot of different interesting subjects. So his current project is the Civil Rights Movement, 1950 to 1970, what was accomplished. And he wants us not to forget the magnitude of the legal victories that were won in Brown versus Board, in the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, fair housing, credit. He wants Thurgood Marshall and Martin Luther King Jr. and John Lewis and the young Stokely Carmichael and others, Rosa Parks, and, you know, and it's all kind of hackneyed and conventional and bland, and, you know, there's no real revolutionary fervor in it. It's an institutional transformation, and, you know, maybe that's what you could expect from a movement, a movement for Black liberation. But I know that there are people who would find that to be a very unsatisfactory framing. You know, who would say, in effect, that the race discrimination, exclusion, unfairness aspect is the least of it, and they would talk about the structure of class relations and whatnot. So, you know, I don't know where your mother would fit in that, but if she were a Black Panther Party person, I imagine that she'd be skeptical about capitalism, and might think that the triumph over the petty apartheid of Jim Crow was kind of woefully inadequate to secure the quote liberation of her people. But I never met your mother.
Well, I'm glad you never met my mother. That's comforting in its own way. I'm a Bostonian, born and bred. My dad was a professor at Boston University for many years. I was a professor at Emerson College. I retired in 2019. But when I heard my mother say that, oh, yeah, we won, it changed everything in my life. And what it made me do is that I began to say, all right, I don't understand the system, so I should learn it. And I read Capital in the 21st Century, and I began studying economics. And then from 2014 to present, I practiced capitalism, was able to quit my job, all sorts of other stuff. And I feel that my generation, Gen X people, are still fighting the war that you guys already won. And I'm concerned that we're wasting our time and that we should be fighting for something else. Do you think that we should be organizing for something else? Do we need another political party? I mean, what are your thoughts on where 40 million African Americans should go forward in the next 20 years?
Well, Robert, I think if race is over, it's over. And that is yesterday's struggle. I'm an old man. I'm 76. I'll soon be 77. The 21st century is well upon us. Look at how technology has changed everything for all of us in the last couple of decades. And, it's going to the pace of change is going to accelerate. The world is getting so small. I just heard Tucker Carlson ranting and raving in an interview with a German journalist in which he was talking about how the European nations, and Germany in particular, had lost their sense of identity and were under pressure and threat from immigration. And I know that's not a new idea. The AfD, I should say, the German right-wing party, and the things that are going on in France and Italy and Belgium and Netherlands and the UK. Anyway, I ramble. I mean, the world is getting small. The legacy of African slavery as a resonant matter of dominating moral and political and historical weight, I think it's doomed. I think it's over. I think race is over. And it is a challenge to me, because a lot of my so-called conservatism, I called my subtitle my book Confessions of a Black Conservative. A lot of my so-called conservatism is based on a kind of antipathy to a way of looking at the racial problem, and I don't know how really conservative I am when you strip that away. I mean, I said I'm involved in this work for celebrating the work and life of Thomas Sowell, and I am growing to have a great respect for his intellect and for the weight of his. I read Friedrich von Hayek's review of Sowell's book Knowledge and Decisions, which was so reverential and respectful. And Hayek is an estimable figure in the history of modern political theory and political philosophy. Sowell is up there. He's communing with the greats. He's and I'm trained as a kind of market-friendly economist. I had a period of romantic connection to the Reagan upsurge way back when in the 80s and stuff. But I don't know. I don't know whether I can resist the pull of a kind of radicalism that makes me want to center social class relations at the core of my. You say you read to Piketty. What did you think? What did you think of that book?
Well, when I first read it, it scared me. I had a very liberal reaction to it. I felt like maybe this was a further call to action, because part of my own upbringing, my parents were card-carrying socialist communists. So when I first read it, my first take on it was very revolutionary, I guess, tear down the system. But I realized I didn't understand the system. And then I said, well, if this is true, I'd rather be the person that has some than the person that doesn't. And so that was my honest reaction, was I don't understand this economy. I've been a college professor for 15 years. I'm highly, quote unquote, educated. I had a valuable professional career, but my first reaction was fear and motivation to be, to put my Che Guevara t-shirt on. But my next reaction was, I don't know anything. And so that I began a self-study in economics to give myself a degree. I've written my thesis, so to speak. So, but with the power, like you said, of technology, I was able to watch dozens of classes in their courses in their entirety, from Yale University, MIT economics, all that stuff. And I read, I think the Sowell book that most got me was Black Rednecks. That was the one where I was like, oh my God, holy crap, he's right. That was the one. I mean, I had a libertarian friend, but I used to throw rocks at him for years, and we would never talk politics because I was deeply committed Democrat at that point in my life. But again, that's how I found your work. I think I vaguely remember, like, my dad talking shit about you directly when you were having your issues at whatever school you were working at in Boston. I can't fully recall. But my dad was like, he would have, slapped Sowell across the face and been like, you're the greatest Uncle Tom that ever lived. That's who my father was. But that was my reaction to it. I just feel like I watch other socialists to understand what their arguments are, because I want to argue against them. And I see members of my own family that are just repeating the same ground, setting up flea markets for Black people only. They call it black market. And like, this isn't doing anything. Like, let's teach everybody how to fill out their taxes and, make some money. I don't know. Did that answer the question? I don't know.
It answered it vividly. And it sounds like you don't want to kill the golden goose, the goose that's making prosperity and economic dynamism possible, and that comes from enterprise. And Sowell, in his book A Conflict of Visions, argues about the distinction between what he calls the constrained and the unconstrained vision. He's a constrained vision guy. He thinks human nature, limited resources, especially limitations on information and the diffusion of information throughout a large intercoordinated society. And he's much more interested, Sowell is, and in this spirit of kind of market appreciation for market dynamics, is in who's going to decide and what's the process, not so much about the outcome of the inequality, but about the process, who's going to decide. And my wife was on this call. I don't see her now, but she's a committed socialist and I'm not. And I think the distinction between the two kind of comes down to a belief in the efficacy of individual initiative and unfettered social interaction and well, of course, for Sowell, and that here he is a conservative. He's got a Burkean kind of vision. He wants to respect the inherited institution and practice. He thinks patriotism can be argued for as a wise, customary solution to a set of political coordination problems and stuff. Anyway, I ramble, Robert. What's your field?
Thank you. I was a filmmaker. I made movies for Miramax, Showtime Network. You can Google me and be annoyed by that if you like. While you're still here, Mark, I'm sorry, dude. One more question, and I promise I'll stop talking. But I think the awakening, or at least the understanding, and I kind of want your opinion on whether you think this is wrong, but what I did in capitalism is I invested in real estate in a white city entirely. I left Roxbury, where I'd been born and raised and spent 45 years of my life, and I went to a small town called Keene, New Hampshire, where the film Lost Boundaries was made about, which is about people passing for white, and me being light-skinned, I was all freaked out in my own mind. But anyway, I ended up buying about 100 apartments. And I don't know if I should feel bad about this, but I had a tenant named Lily White who would write me her check, and it made me laugh and laugh and laugh. Was that wrong of me?
Well, that's pretty funny.
And then I said, "What is this, reparations?" So that's it.
Have you read Matthew Desmond's Evicted? This is the sociologist at Princeton. This was a prize-winning book of a few years ago. You don't have to answer on camera, but if you own 100 apartments, I think the book would interest you.
No, I read it and can refute. I read that one and his book on America buys. Oh, I can't remember. It was the one he did after that one. But he's just so wrong about the real world that I just can't. It's hard actually to read it. I read it almost as a way as comedy now at this point. I know that's mean, but that's how I feel.
That's so interesting, man. That is so interesting.
How is
because I'm a bleeding heart over here. Oh, go ahead, LaJuan.
How is he wrong about the real world?
Well, do you want to talk about anything in specific, Mrs. Loury? Dr. Loury? I'm not sure.
Well, what do you mean by Matthew Desmond being wrong about the real world?
Okay, so Matthew Desmond's version is that there's this big giant landlord who's a mean person out there who doesn't give a damn about them, and he will throw you out onto the street if you don't pay his rent. That's it. Would you say that that's a concept within that book?
That's pretty much the concept I've encountered in the world.
Right. And so I would say, okay, I've got 100 units, 5% go up or down or get into trouble. So does the landlord say to this person, all right, let me give you 2 more extra weeks and you come back to me? Almost everyone I've ever met that does the work would do that. Secondarily, if the same person comes to me, I literally give them the phone number for City of Keene Housing Support, where, see, New Hampshire is different from any other state in the union where it's illegal to be homeless. So you can go to any small local town government and they will pay your rent, your mortgage, your heating bill, whatever they have to do to prevent you from being homeless. So then the person doesn't do that, where it's right there. You can take care of me and I will keep you in your house. They still don't do it. So then I end up having to sue them. So I got to hire a lawyer. I actually got thrown out of the court by the judge because he said, although it's legal for you to represent yourself, I believe that you're practicing law illegally because you're not a lawyer. So I will not hear another case from you unless you have a lawyer. So now I got to go pay a month's rent to get this lawyer to come down. The first thing the judge tells us to do is to go and mediate, work it out. Can they come up with $200 a month toward their arrearages? They swear they're going to go to Keene Housing. So now 6 months has gone by. I still haven't got a check. I got the bank, my local bank, saying, hey, make sure you're cool with the mortgage. I make sure I'm cool with the mortgage. But now I'm sitting here saying, all right, I got a kid in law school. who needs her bills paid. And I've signed away my life to say that I swear to God, I'll collect this money. So what they're saying to you is that I'm telling you from the real world, 5 to 10% of the tenants will not do anything to help themselves. In fact, they do things to destroy themselves. They'll go and throw every toy they have on my front lawn. They'll go and flush stuff down the toilet just to be a pain in my ass and laugh at me. So that's the real world. And that's the real world that I know quite well and quite intimately. And that's what I share back at you.
So what about the landlords that don't take care of the property? That I'm pretty sure that if you were a landlord in Texas, you would do just fine. Landlords have a lot more rights in Texas than they do in New Hampshire. And there aren't a lot of housing assistance options in Texas to help tenants. Usually, if a landlord decides that they don't want to manage the property anymore, they can just give the tenants notice and they'd have to be out within a couple of weeks. And then those tenants have nowhere else to go, or they're struggling to find somewhere else to go. So, what do you think about that? I think that perhaps in your world in Keene, New Hampshire, it seems like New Hampshire wants to provide assistance to tenants, but in different states, that's not the same. That doesn't happen.
Well, I have a couple things to say. The first thing is that I believe the statistic is 70% of all affordable housing is provided by mom and pop landlords that own, 50, 10 to 100 doors like myself. And I would say that the actual affordable housing in this country is run by little guys like myself. Now I'm actually semi-retiring from that as well, but that's irrelevant. I would say that if I was in Texas or something, my first reaction would be to celebrate. Now, I'll tell you the saddest thing that ever happened to me was I evicted a tenant, and I don't know why they would do this to themselves, but they had 4 dogs, a rabbit, a ferret, and a bird. And I walk into this apartment. This is an apartment that's in an 18-unit building, mind you. So the way they live affects the way everybody lives that lives in this building. And I walked in, I can see fleas running up the wall. I'm calling animal services to come and help with these damn animals, but these people have to get out of here. It's not fair that all my other tenants have to deal with the fleas and the mess and the noise and all the other stuff that you make. I have to look out for the many, not the few or the one. But the saddest part of this is after they had left, the sheriffs had locked the door and done everything. The husband in the couple relationship runs back and he says, "Can I please come back in?" And the law is they have to wait 5 days. Then they have specific times they can come and get their stuff, blah, blah, blah. I said, why? What do you want? And he was like, "I need my tent." And that was a moment where I said, "Holy shit, I just put this guy out on the street." Now, LaJuan, you're going to love this. At the same time, I was also the landlord to the homeless shelter. And so I was the landlord to the only homeless shelter in Keene, New Hampshire that would house between 20 and 50 people a night. So obviously I was able to also recommend this person to go to the homeless shelter, but the gravity of my responsibility in this was clear. But at the same time, one, how can you let this person live here with all the noise from these animals in a 1-bedroom apartment with fleas, roaches, smells, all this other stuff? How do you make the choice? What is the decision that you have to make? And I took it from a socialist perspective and said, I got to look out for the needs of the many, not the one. But I still took it upon myself to make the call. But the guy, he didn't want it. He'd rather go live in the woods than live in the homeless shelter. So it's like, I don't know. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what happened.
Well, I'm sure that was a tough decision. And of course, when your tenant has a host of animals that it sounds like the tenant didn't take very good care of them, or didn't take very good care of your property.
Well, one thing I should add into here.
Yeah.
In my
I think
experience, I'm sorry.
to interrupt you, Robert,
I
but
apologize, Glenn, but let me
no,
just
there are
throw.
people waiting. Why don't we?
Okay.
I'll leave. I'll just say this one thing.
Okay.
It's mental illness. 5% to 10% of the population has mental illness problems. They get addicted to drugs, and they end up being in this problem. And society expects us, the landlord, to pay for it.
I'm not sure I agree with that, but we need to move on.
Mark has had his hand raised for a long time.
Everybody, Glenn, I think you know who I am. I sent you a few emails. I've been following you for 5 years now, I guess. What Robert said reminded me of a little funny story. I think everybody get a kick out of it. In terms of the Lily White, and we got such a kick out of the check or collecting a check from Lily White. So a friend of mine she's in Florida, and she told me she hired a maid. And she lives in Florida. I said, a Hispanic? She said, no, I got me a white maid. So my comment to that was, gavel black power. Oldie but goodie. I'd like to start on a light note. Now I want to really mention something really heavy, is that to Glenn's comment that he's exhilarated that the taboo on anti-Semitism is starting to dissolve, because that's what it is. That's what it is. We're not doing this anymore. No more. Keep in mind that this time around, and this includes Israel, the Jews have guns. This isn't happening again. It's not happening. Okay? So for you to be exhilarated about it, I think that's a real good idea. Somehow Epstein may be linked to Mossad because he's Jewish. That's textbook. And there's some international Zionist cabal with Mossad and Epstein. That's textbook. That's textbook. You're shaking your head. Listen, we've heard this before. We've heard this for over and over again, and it ain't happening. We're not talking. Okay, you can shake your head, but it's not a matter of talking. It's a matter this time we're defending ourselves.
I'm not shaking my head.
Now
I am.
Yeah.
Oh.
And Tucker is vintage, and think of what he did. He goes up there and with zero evidence that Epstein is Mossad, and everybody in DC knows it, but we can't say it because the Jews control everything. That's textbook. The reality is that there's zero evidence, and it doesn't even pass an Occam's razor test, because Israel has strong support in America, and one of the bedrocks of support is the Bible, in the sense of how it's been the basis of America since the Pilgrims. But more important to a lot of evangelicals, that they believe that the existence of Israel means the beginning of the end times. That's what the Bible says, and the Messiah coming. And in fact, what I believe, I guess they call it a Jewish Christian or maybe Jewish Muslim, is that Messiah is coming for the second time, based on Isaiah 53. So that's why why would Israel endanger that support that they already have by setting up a pedophile, kiddie porn, diabolical blackmail scheme to blackmail people to support Israel? It doesn't make any sense from just a spycraft point of view. It makes zero sense logistically. And from Mossad's point of view, what they're looking at is spying in the Middle East, mainly on Iran, to get information and to whack people, which they should. So how many Iranians are they going to capture with an Epstein trap? And all that money, it makes no sense. It makes zero sense. And there's not even in reality, there's not even any intel that that Epstein was intel. It's possible. Vicky Ward said it's possible. And Occam's razor said that since he was an international player and had connections, that he would be an asset and he'd be used possibly by CIA and Mossad and Saudis and MI6 and everybody. And that is possible. But that's not what Tucker said. He's Mossad and everybody knows it, but we can't talk about it because the Jews control everything. Well, if we control everything, how do we wind up in the ovens if we control everything? And we're not winding up in the ovens this time. That's my main point. It ain't happening again.
Mark, do you have a question you want to ask?
Yeah, what's your question?
I just can't comprehend that Glenn, with his mind, would fall into this and be suckered in by Tucker. Tucker's not an intelligent man. Tucker says he was attacked by a demon. Tucker says nuclear science is from Satan because it appeared out of nowhere. He says it appeared out of nowhere. No, it didn't. It develops from Rutherford right up to the Manhattan Project. He believes that all our wars since 1945 were to kill Christians. He's spreading a real lie that Israel's now killing Christians. It's like out of Protocols of the Elders of Zion. So I just don't understand how Glenn could fall for someone like Tucker Carlson. It's incomprehensible to me. And he's not a first-rate mind. He's not. Just scratch the surface. That's what he said, that nuclear science just came out of nowhere in the 40s, and so it must be from Satan. This is a deranged man. So that's my fundamental question.
Wow. Mark, I don't even know where to begin. Disclaimer, I'm not endorsing everything that Tucker Carlson says or believes, but I was stimulated in the way that I said by what I thought was the daring quality of challenging a taboo. And I think you've given very powerful evidence of why it's a taboo. I like Tucker. My wife and I had a dinner with him. He was engaging. He was interesting. Is he a little crazy? Yeah, maybe he's a little crazy. Is he a racist? Is he an anti-Semite? I wouldn't say so. I know that that's anathema to many people, including you, Mark, but I wouldn't say so. It ain't happening again. The Jews have guns. I believe you. I take you very seriously. I don't have anything else to say.
Susanna.
Hi, thank you. My question just changes, I'm changing topics radically. I'm thinking back to that live stream conversation, I think with Mark, where you guys were talking about AI. And I believe Mark was saying I got out of higher education right before all of this hit, and you just retired. I've been at it for 12 years. I teach at a state university in California, and my feeling, I'm teaching at the same university where I graduated. So I've been here for 25 years. And the feeling that I have is that we are all polishing the brass on the Titanic. Like here we are, higher education is just taking a nosedive. And I don't know whether I'm 44. I'm hoping that I get to 50 so that I can collect a meager retirement, but I literally see the whole thing disappearing. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts, Glenn, about the future of higher education? I mean, at the same time, the other thing that I have in mind, with the Columbia thing is on top of the anti-Semitism stuff, we also have universities flagrantly violating civil rights and insisting on doing racial discrimination in admissions and, defiance of the Supreme Court ruling, and videos that keep surfacing about like, oh, we're not calling it DEI, but we're still keeping on. And, the replication crisis, the inner rot that I see in terms of like, orthodoxy, the resistance to, hear different points of view. I'm wondering what's your point of view on the long-term health and longevity of American higher ed?
Well, Susanna, I don't know if I have a whole lot of insight. I've got a lot of experience. I've been in higher ed since the mid 1970s, but I don't know if I have a whole lot of insight. The technology thing with AI and all of that is shaking things up. The elite higher education, the reputational hit that it's taken of late, I think is shocking and historic and noteworthy. The economics of higher education, I mean, it's hard to make a living, isn't it, as an adjunct professor in a lot of places, and so on. So I am emeritus professor now at Brown University, and I almost want to say it's not my problem anymore. I have such fond memories of my own experience in higher education over the last half century. I'm tempted to write a book about teaching, about my teachers and about my students that have been transformative experiences in my own life. I remember the wonder that I felt when I first discovered books and a library carrel and somebody whose office hours I could go to and talk to without structure about books and ideas. Being introduced to the German language, learning what deep mathematical logic looks like, experiencing literature from someone who's read and thought carefully about art and so on. I think at its best, wonderful, transformative, life-affirming, life-changing possibilities are latent in the institutions that I cherish, to be honest with you. I mean, at a symposium that they had here at Brown University, McWhorter, my conversation partner at the podcast, and I were in colloquy, and I was asked what I thought about the Trump administration's assault on the Harvards and Columbias of the world. And I mean, my basic short answer was the barbarians are at the gates. And I asked myself, who do I want to decide whether or not Edward Said's Orientalism is worth reading? Do I want political apparatchiks deciding, or do I want professors of development and anthropology and Middle Eastern studies and history deciding? I don't know. Not everybody is going to agree with my answers to that. On the affirmative action front, sure, there's going to be efforts to maintain racial diversity by getting around the prohibitions of the recent Supreme Court decision. But it sounds like the current administration is vigilant in holding schools accountable for that. So it ain't over. That struggle is not over. I'll acknowledge that.
There's a question in chat that I want to bring up because Susanna mentioned AI. Which school of economics will prove to be most relevant to the coming AI era?
Oh, I think the neoclassical school. I think the men and women who are astute at analyzing the implications of contract, incentives, markets, information. I think the tools are the tools, and applying the tools of economic analysis to newly evolving technological frontiers is pretty much best done by the methods of inquiry that have proven themselves to be most insightful. I mean, statistical inferential methods and experimental methods and basic laws of supply and demand. I don't think they're going to get repealed by the evolution of a new technology.
Let's take another question. So we have like 10 minutes left, and there are 3 raised hands that I see. Madeline hasn't spoken yet. Madeline, could you unmute yourself?
Hello.
Hi, Madeline.
Thanks for answering my question a couple weeks ago. It was the one about the Christian and the secularist.
Oh, Maddie, hi.
Oh, yeah, that Madeline.
Hi. I'm at work right now, but I thought I'd call in.
Okay.
I have a burning question about your intro song, of all things. What is it and who made it?
Nikita can answer that question.
The band is called Just Normal, and the track is called Chazed, I think.
It's very good. Is it called Jazz with a J?
CH, Chazed.
Oh, Chaz. Interesting. And then I was also wondering, when it comes to self-censorship, where do you draw the line between like keeping a relationship with a family member and speaking your mind?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, isn't it? And you have to think about the fact that it's a dynamic problem. It's not just what's going on in the moment or today. It's a relationship that's at stake, and you want to be able to sustain the conversation over a period of time. And so a certain amount of stringency and forbearance and restraint are, I think, going to be a part of the picture. But then there is also the problem of I've had it up to here and I'm not going to take it anymore kind of thing, where you are being asked to pay a price for suppressing, and you feel being badly treated and you need to stick up for yourself and stuff like that. So I don't know how to answer in the abstract. I think one would need to get into the details of whatever the particular situation is, but I think there are trade-offs. I don't think there's a solution to the problem. I think it's a management. It's a question of managing the relationship. And people have therapists and they tell their therapist the things that they don't want to tell to their husband or their child or their business partner or whatever. So
Thank you. And what you said a couple weeks ago also resonated with me, figuring out what is okay and what would be too much, when it comes to differences with the
religious differences. Yeah.
Right. Picking your battles.
Okay, well, thank Maddie.
Thank you. So nice to see you all.
It's nice to see you too. Okay, so we got 8 minutes left. 2 hands are still raised. Lianis, I don't know if you're back or not. I'm gonna try to ask you to unmute yourself. There we go.
Okay. Can you hear me this time?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. I guess to piggyback off of the previous question, so Madeline kind of beat me to it, but especially with the growing tensions with politics, and I'm currently also in academia and kind of dealing with colleagues and fellow mentees that kind of have this increased aggression towards just certain thoughts. And me and my partner also have kind of contradicting ideas and we think differently. And this is a question to both you and your wife on how exactly you go about with these conversations, and kind of how do you hold a long-term relationship, and how do you hold these conversations where you might not necessarily meet eye to eye, but you really care about this person and you really want to make sure that your intentions aren't necessarily mistaken.
I'll let my wife respond to that.
Hello, Leonis. Thank you for the question. Well, I I can say, Leonis, that Glenn and I do engage in some heated discussions, and sometimes we have to, um, if we're in the throes of a heated discussion, one of us will have to stop and say, okay, obviously we can't talk about this. Maybe not ever, or maybe not right now, but perhaps we should stop. Let's talk about something else, or let's go our separate ways. Um, it's not easy. Uh, Sometimes we'll circle back and talk about it, especially if some new development has occurred, and then perhaps we can find common ground. For you and your partner, the best thing to do is sometimes the best thing to do is to call a truce and not discuss that particular matter anymore, especially if it's going to uh, continue to become heated. If you really care and you love each other enough, you're going to find ways to manage your disagreements. It seems simple, but it's not. It takes a lot of work, and perhaps some counseling to help you manage uh, your discussions and your disagreements, because there are ways to continue to disagree with each other without being disagreeable.
Glenn, do you want to add anything, or should we go to the next question?
No, I think I could reiterate what I may have said previously, which is mutual respect. It's critical that listening, hearing the person out is really important. That the avoidance of getting personal, you're the kind of person who, as opposed to the substantive matters at under dispute, things of this kind. I think timeout, timeout can be a very helpful device, like my wife said, and the ability of intervention, counseling, someone to be able to talk about it if when things, there's resentment and there's injuries that are being nursed and there's things that haven't been given voice to. It relates to self-censorship. It really does. That can be helpful. I just kind of reiterate those things. Listen, before we conclude, we only have a few minutes. I do want to encourage people to support the show. You can do that by becoming a paying subscriber at glennlowry.substack, and you get benefits for that. And we wouldn't want the show to conclude without calling that to your attention and urging you to support us if you feel so moved.
Let's do one last question, and that'll be it for today. So Achilles wanted to follow up.
Hey, all right, one more question. Let me see. So Glenn, I remember watching a panel that you were on one time back in the day. It was the responsibility of Black intellectuals in the age of crack.
Wow.
Yeah, this was a Harvard
a long
panel
time
that
ago.
you were on.
Yeah, that was in the 80s, man.
Oh, I've been on your website. I've been looking for. I scour the internet for that kind of stuff. Because I think you are an extremely nuanced thinker on the question of race. But I think your return to conservatism, and tell me if I'm getting this right, it's, in a sense, you returned because of a sense of desperation, because you wanted to reject this narrative, the determinist narrative, the sense that we are only products of our environment. And not only that, you look at what the government has done. You say the government gave us mass incarceration, the government cut welfare, the government hasn't done anything for us that we can actually look at and say has advanced us. And even if they can do something, they won't do anything. So in a way, we kind of have to pick everything up and start ourselves. So I'm just wondering, when your conservatism is a little more nuanced nowadays than it used to be, because you're not the same Glenn Loury that you were in the 1980s with race and responsibility. Is it almost a driven by this reach for free will, this reach for dignity, something like that?
It's a long story, Achilles, but you're on to something. And, I mean, I have a set piece response. Why you're a conservative? Well, I think the market economists probably have the better of it vis-a-vis the socialists. Well, I think the theists don't have a slam dunk, but they're grappling with a really hard problem, which is what is the meaning of life? And we're not that smart that we're going to reinvent the whole thing out of whole cloth every generation. So a sense of reverence for inherited structure of institutional religious questing is worthy of being respected. So there's kind of a cultural conservative thing. But the other thing, and maybe it is the main thing, as a Black man confronting the realities of our condition, I speak of African Americans, descendants from slaves, and so on. I'm not going to be picky about the outer boundary of the collectivity which I have in mind when I talk about Black Americans. I realize it's porous and differentiated and malleable, but in any case, which is the way forward? And I think the ball is in our court, and I've tried to develop that idea in a number of different narrative voices, but the bias narrative and the development narrative is the one I'm going to settle on here. The bias narrative is white man has done us wrong. The structure is all against us. We can't, our nose are forever against the candy store window. And the development narrative is about opening up the possibilities of growth. It's about investing in the future. It's about acquiring skills. It's about an affirmative seizing of responsibility. So yeah, that is kind of where I'm coming out. And my lovely wife and I don't share the same views on that subject, and that becomes a source, apropos of the previous question, of continuing interesting dynamic tension between us. Thanks to everybody for tuning into this live stream. Thanks, Mark Altshuler, for your intervention.
Thanks, everybody. GlennLowry.substack.com is where you can subscribe to the newsletter, the podcast, the bonus materials, and all that. Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, LaJuan. Until next time.
Thank you, Nikita. We wouldn't be doing this without you.
Well, once we stop streaming, I'll ask you whether you're happy about it or not. Take care, everybody. Thank you.
All right, guys. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.